everybody, and welcome back to the Dash Trader Newsroom. How many more times can the Fed cut rates? It's a conversation on the street these days. My name is Michael DeJoyer. I'm the Director of Educational Services here at Dash Trader, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jill Molendrino. Jill, how are you?
Good, doing well, Mike. Good to see you.
Fantastic, Jill. So Appaloosa's David Tepper states that he believes that the Fed will have to cut rates 2 to 3 more times to maintain credibility. This as markets make all-time highs, and for the most part, economic data looks pretty good. What are your thoughts on the matter?
You know, it's interesting. I was watching that interview this morning, and it seems as if he's hedging his bets, just like everyone else's, because there is uncertainty out there. Nobody necessarily knows what policy or whether it's related to tax, healthcare, or otherwise is going to look like. The 50 basis point cut was a nice surprise, and the economists and strategists that we have on the show expect at least another one or two to come by the end of the year, because there are some concerns around employment, but not enough to raise the alarm. You have to remember, even if the unemployment rate moves, let's call it a tenth of a point, or it doesn't matter. Once you start to get more tenths of a point adding up into one print, that's when it starts to matter. We haven't seen that. There's no expectation on the horizon for that. So that's where strategists are thinking at this point. But what's interesting is he was very clear in saying that he won't be short, even though he had some hesitation with the move with the bank with the Fed's move. He's not betting against U.S. equities. He thinks that there will be immediate benefits of easy policy. I think his issue with the U.S. markets more than anything is a value standpoint, which, when you look at other markets, whether they're developed international or emerging markets, their valuations certainly look more attractive than the U.S. But I think it's really tough to get short the U.S. market here. And even said too, he's like, well, it would make me nervous if the economy were to, project downwards. He's like, I would not want to be somewhat, not involved in the U.S. market. So
Yeah,
I think,
it's like how do you not be involved in a market that's at all-time highs? Because if you get out, then you're not participating. Right? Like
right.
you have to either be, you have to be in and hope for the best. Generally, markets need to be somewhat optimistic
Right.
unless it's clearly bearish.
So, Mike, when we talk about the rate cuts as well, and I think were you on the day on the show when they cut rates? I don't remember if you were on with us. I don't know. I don't believe you were.
I think that was
But
the week before.
the week before, and we were talking about 25 or 50 basis points, and I think I even made this
You
comment.
said the point that if it's 50 basis point, maybe the economy is worse than we expected.
But the other point that I made too was, if we get the 50 basis points, does it give the perception that the Fed isn't political because they're not making a move a day after the election?
Yeah.
So that could be part of it as well. But again, even with Tepper talking about rate cuts and what that means for the economy, he also said that the Fed has to cut rates at least 2 or 3 more times to keep credibility. So there was a lot of hedging with some of the things that he said. I mean, he's a brilliant investor. I couldn't shine his shoes, obviously. However, there was hedging in what he was saying. So again, I think it's reflecting what the overall marketplace is with there's just not enough clarity out there yet. And as sad as it sounds, we might not even, you know, who knows what the transition of power is going to look like. It all comes down to what legislation is going to be passed if we're split, or one party owns everything or not. And I think that's really going to be the key issue here.
Absolutely. And I mean, that brings me to the next talking point here today. Pretty much since, I was a very early adapter to Ethereum mining specifically, but certainly cryptocurrencies in general. Bitcoin since 2016, 2017. We've been talking about Bitcoin hitting 100,000 pretty much since that time. Like have been numerous predictions that Bitcoin would hit 100,000. Will 2025 be the year? I'm a big gold bull. I've always been a big gold bull, mainly because whatever happens in the election, it just seems like the U.S. government is printing money at an alarming rate, and the debt is piling up, which has a positive effect on the price of gold. The next question is, will gold break 3,000 going into 2025? However, Bitcoin hitting 100,000 as a gold hedge, as a US dollar hedge, and gold hitting 3,000 as a US dollar hedge. Both of these indicate that the US dollar seems to be entering a period of weakness relative to these two asset classes. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin hitting 100,000 and gold breaking 3,000?
Well, I think 100,000 could be a bit aggressive. Look, I've been holding a number of digital assets for quite some time. I'm talking 2017, 2018, and that's just my nature. Even just learning about the asset class itself more so than anything, I don't have a big chunk of my portfolio in it. But it's one way to learn. So as a hodler, yes, I would love it. However, I think now that we're seeing more institutional adoption, with that comes ways to hedge it and place, risk parameters around it. So I don't think that we will get those massive moves that we've seen just because you've gotten this institutional adoption, and whether we're seeing legislation and policy being formulated, or what Gensler said this morning, the ETF wrapper is how this is going to be viewed because the underlying isn't a security itself. It was a really key point that he had made. So now that you're seeing comments like that come out, or because the expectation for more products and ETF wrappers are going to come out, some of those outsized moves might not necessarily take place relative to years past. That's my thought on it. I think that, more range-bound trade is more probable than seeing those moves that we've seen before. Look, if it gets to 100,000, yay, but I don't think we're going to see that. Quick note, we are going to be at Mainnet next week, which is brought on by Masari. It's one of the largest US crypto conferences, where we will be focusing on exclusively institutional adoption and the formulation of legislation and policy in the US. So a lot of great stuff is going to come out of that, and hope to follow up next time we're on. Gold breaking 3,000, Mike, it's interesting. One of the things we saw this year was gold and equities continuing to hit highs in lockstep, which typically isn't the case. And there's a number of reasons why people think that could have happened. If we come back to more normalized markets now that rates are coming down and bonds are reacting off of that and stocks are reacting a certain way, will those inverse moves start to take place? So that's kind of more along the lines of how I'm thinking about it longer term. In terms of trading it like you guys do. You can certainly speak more to that than I can, but I think longer term, I'm curious to see how this plays out, where equities and gold and all these asset classes aren't moving up in tandem with each other, because historically they typically don't.
Yeah. And absolutely, Bitcoin has sort of been trading with technology lately. Like when technology sells off, that's when Bitcoin sells off. It's not really trading like a true hedge to the US dollar, or people talk about it as digital gold, but it's not really trading like digital gold. It's trading almost more in line with technology stocks. And that's an interesting correlation. But that brings me to my next topic, which was, more related to political volatility as we get into the election season. And certainly political volatility as it relates to corruption here in New York City. We had kind of an unprecedented historical event. The sitting mayor, Eric Adams, became the first mayor to be charged while still in office, with really somewhat unprecedented charges. He was charged with corruption related to, a Turkish hotel suite, among other things, potentially. But it doesn't seem like the markets care at this point. Also, in other news, we had Biden's commerce chief, say some really, shocking comments like, let's extinguish Trump for good, after two assassination attempts, which is also somewhat unprecedented. What happened to respectfully disagreeing and having some civil society, and trying to, respectfully disagree and have civil discourse? What are your thoughts on this really unprecedented political volatility and corruption that we're seeing, in our country?
Yeah, Mike, I would agree with you. And this is something that I'm passionate about, not politics, but being able to have civil discourse and understanding both sides of the story. And I think that's a smart thing to do. You and I have, we've agreed and disagreed on different fundamental views of the market. And that's what makes interesting conversation. I read something this morning that CNN had put out. They did a survey. I'm reading off my phone, apologies. They asked
Don't worry about it.
10-year-olds about the election, 10-year-olds about the election. And as expected, it was highly polarized answers in terms of how they perceived Trump, in terms of how they perceived Harris regionally. So everything that you would expect. And the most concerning thing about it is, why are 10-year-olds not being taught about American civics and being good stewards on the global stage? And they're being used to regurgitate talking points that don't have any meat behind them. That
Yeah.
is the bigger concern. We have an entire generation that has been scarred by this, right? And
Yeah.
to me, I'm getting the chills talking about it. That is an existential concern as a country that we need to face, because this is going to be the cycle that continues to play out where people don't understand our legislative and judicial and executive branches function, and they only go by talking points or what's happening in the news or what they hear on social media, what they hear from their parents. And nobody's even being taught basic social studies or civics anymore.
I mean,
That's
it's like,
crazy.
I just remember, like, in various, movies and things that I watched growing up when I was a kid, that I would agree to disagree, and I
Right.
would respectfully disagree, and then you still, at the end of the whatever discussion you have, you shake hands, and then
Mhm.
you respect the other person. I don't see a degree of respect of the other person's position. And like you said, you and I have talked about many topics over the years, and we sometimes don't agree, but we both respect each other. And to me, that concerns me for our country. And then you see things like political violence, which I don't remember ever seeing two assassination attempts in a presidential election in my lifetime.
Right.
And then to have somebody continue to say things that could be inflammatory is really scary for me, and certainly for my children going into this world. And I know that you're in the same in have a similar opinion, that we need to learn to agree to disagree.
Right. Like, and this is some, you know, regardless of your opinion about Trump, it's not about that. The fact that a former US president and a presidential candidate, of which he is both, um, could have been assassinated on our soil, and the fact that not every American is not upset about that, to me, is we have to, that's when you talk about country before party, right?
Yes,
This is a person
absolutely.
that represents us on the global scale, for better or for worse. That's not the point. But Mike, I remember during 9/11, you and I having been there and lived through it, working in the city, living in the
Yeah,
city, that day. It was, thank God, social media didn't exist. Every single person on the street, regardless of religion, race, woman, man,
all
we were
united as New Yorkers.
sharing phones, offering our apartments to people who were just displaced.
Absolutely.
If your phone
Risking
didn't
your
work, here's
life
my
just being
phone.
there. Just
Right,
being there was risking your life, as we found out later, because of
right,
chemicals in the air.
right. But that's how you and I have grown up, and we're not that old in the grand scheme of things. But the fact that, like, our kids' generation and even a little bit younger is growing up and learning about talking points and not civics is highly concerning.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. And I think that's the reason I put this slide in there, is because even though the markets don't seem to care yet, if this problem of not being able to respect each other's opinion doesn't get addressed, it will eventually manifest itself in the market in some way, and it will turn
Mhm.
into volatility. It
Well,
is
it's
not
a national
a problem.
security issue, Mike. It's a national security issue at the end of the day. If
Absolutely.
we are not supportive of our leaders and look strong and unified, that is a national security issue, and that will impact the markets.
And certainly, as far as Turkish officials comping a suite to a sitting, New York City mayor, shows foreign political interests doing affecting our political process. And we know that it's not just Mayor Eric Adams, and certainly he hasn't been convicted yet, and he's claimed that he's innocent. And I believe that we still have innocent until proven guilty. But the fact is that foreign influencers are trying to influence our elections, and have certainly influenced the mayor of New York in some capacity, because he's being accused of it. And in some cases, the accusation is as bad as the crime. So I just feel like it needed to be mentioned that civil society and civil discourse has to be made a priority and a value in our society again, the way it was when you and I were both growing up. So on
Yep.
that note, Jill, thank you so much as always for being here.
All right. I will talk to you guys in a couple weeks. Take care,
See you in a
Mike.
couple of weeks, Jill. Thank you. All right, so there I am with my dash trade. I'm just going to expand my screen here. We got 10 minutes till the market close. All right, so as far as the markets are concerned, let's see QQQ. Kind of a gap up and sell off day on the QQQ. We've gapped up to near the prior high, and we have been pretty much selling off until we faded the gap. And just look at what it looks like on the 15-minute chart. We faded the gap and we have subsequently bounced, but we have not recouped all of those gains. Let's go to the SPY. We have gapped up and sold off, but we are very, very close to all-time highs on the SPY, which represents the S&P 100, the DIA, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, ETF, the DIA, the diamonds, at all-time highs, basically at all-time highs. Markets all showing strength. GLD, which represents the gold ETF, at all-time highs. It's very odd that the markets are at all-time highs. Gold is at all-time highs. GBTC, which is representative of Bitcoin, not at all-time highs, but certainly at the top of this little micro range here, as you can see this little range here. We have stocks like Google. Let's see, Google, not near all-time highs, but certainly Google has had some of its own stock-specific problems. MSFT, Microsoft, not near all-time highs, but pretty close to them. Apple, AAPL, Apple near all-time highs. Triple top potentially on Apple, but also could just be breaking out, ready to make another run for the money, as it is still above its moving averages. A stock above its moving averages is considered bullish, so not looking too bad. Let's take a look at oil, USO. Oil certainly has gapped down, but it's looks like it might be forming a range here, or a base here, or a higher low. Oil generally does rise going into the winter in the Northeast as demand increases. That's pretty much it for our market analysis. I'm just going to move this to the other side of the screen and stay up to date with all things DAS by signing up for our monthly newsletter emails. Simply fill out the form at the bottom of our webpage at www.dastrader.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dash Trader TV, for our Dash Newsroom reminders. Follow us on social media at Dash Trader on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you in a couple of weeks. Trade well, everybody.